Hello, welcome back to Bodhran Basics. I'm Matt DeBlas. This week we're going to have some tips on tippers. We're going to talk about some of the things we use to play our drums. And a few things, advice. I know I showed some of my tipper collection before. I'm going to talk about some of the differences this time. A lot of Bodhrans come with kind of not great tippers. They're very light and short and don't play that well, and they're just not much to write home about. So you'll probably find yourself wanting to upgrade pretty quickly. And there's a couple of different basic styles that are good to be aware of. One is a more bulbous tipper style, like so. Tends to have rounded ends, maybe a little bit of grip in the middle. This is one example. This is another example. This one's somewhat lighter, and I think came stock with one of my drums. This one's a bit heavier. Now, an advantage of a heavier tipper is that it's easier to feel the swing to it because there's more weight towards the ends. You feel it swing back and forth, and it's really easy also to get the triplets. So a heavier tipper has that advantage. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's heavy, which means it'll be slowing and you'll get tired playing with it after a while. This one is a similar style, but much simpler, a lighter wood, and you'll notice it doesn't sound that much different, but it's much, much lighter. The only downside, there's no grip on this one in the middle, so if you're not careful, it can kind of swing in your hand like that. One way around that is take a rubber band or hair tie like this. Like so, and kind of act as a stop. And you'll notice I don't put it dead center, I put it a little bit off center. So it lets me hold it fairly loosely. The other basic style of tipper, aside from the bulbous ended one, is your basic pencil or stick tipper, like so. And this one is just a straight rod, about the same length as the bulbous tipper that I've got. It's skinnier and lighter and doesn't have any roundness to the ends. I mean, it's rounded off so it doesn't damage the drum, but it doesn't have any bulbousness. And so it's got a little bit of a tappier sound. The other disadvantage that makes this a little more challenging is that it doesn't have extra weight to the ends. It's all the same thickness all the way through, except for this little grippy notch in the middle, or near the middle. So it's a little bit harder to sense or to feel the swing as you're learning to use it. And it's a bit lighter, and on a heavier skin drum it doesn't make as much sound, but on the thinner skin modern drum, it's got a pretty good sound. I've actually got a variation of that concept, of a straight stick tipper, but a fatter one. So this one is similar lengths, much thicker, but actually not much heavier because it's a lighter wood. And that on this drum sounds kind of boomy. On this drum, gives you a nice round tone. So one of the advantages of this, some people find the thinner sticks, they have to squeeze a little harder, they have a harder time gripping it, so it causes more hand fatigue. Where the fatter stick lets you relax your hand a little bit more. But you know, if you use a heavy wood one, it'll come up with more weight. So a fat, light stick is actually pretty comfy for me. And where a lot of people go with that on more modern style is these hot rod style beaters, which are a bunch of basically kebab skewers, rounded off at the end, that's important, together. So they don't weigh much of anything, but they've got a really fat grip area. And they also have a really nice sound. These have, because they've got a big surface area and a bit more flex to them, they get a lot of that low thump. but at the same time, because they're multi-rods, they give you a nice little click to them. So you get a fairly complex sound. Which actually, when applied to the thinner-headed style of drum, you get all sorts of cool stuff. So these are kind of neat. And you'll notice, like on this one, it's got a rounded end with a little rubber cap, but you can still do the triplet with it because the top end, the specifics of the top end don't make as much different as your main playing end. So as long as it's nothing sharp or hard that's going to damage the skin of the drum, you can do your triplet roll with everything. I've got one I made myself that has, you know, rounded skewers on either end. But you'll notice the difference between the skewer end and the rubber cap end isn't terribly dramatic, and when you're playing at speed, isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. So, 3 types of tippers, basically. Bulbous tipper, stick tipper, and skewer tipper. So let's talk a little more now about your grip and some fine tuning. Now, regardless of the type of tipper you're holding, the inclination, because there's usually some sort of notch or groove or pattern in the middle, is to hold it dead center. But really you want to hold it anywhere from just north of that center toward all the way up to 2/3, depending on how the thing's weighted and balanced. So this one I'd hold a little bit more here, and I might use that notch just to kind of find my center. And there's also a couple different grips. It's not exactly like holding a pencil, as much as I talked about that, but really what's happening is, with my grip, 2 fingers are pinching it here, and the third one is just kind of resting on the back. So when you swing down, and it's kind of wiggling between these 2 fingers, and this finger here, the middle finger, acts as a bit of a stop on the downstroke. And these 2 fingers don't actually do much. So I can kind of I need this third finger to hold it at the right angle and to act as a bit of a backstop. There's also a type of grip that's referred to often as a baby grip, which a lot of modern players are using, which is basically you grab the stick like you're again using these 2 fingers to pinch it, but you're using the other fingers as kind of that backstop. So when you swing down, it'll rest against those fingers and they'll help push it back up. And for a lot of people, find that that gives you a lot less tension in your hand. It's better to illustrate for me with a fatter tipper and a longer one. So one of this one. So down, up. And you still can do your triplet rolls. I'm not as good with this one, sorry. And I'll include a link to another Bodhran player who's much better with that type of grip, but it's another way to explore. I'm used to this type of grip, and that's what I use primarily, is that kind of modified pencilish grip. But if you find you've got less tension in your hand, that way, try the baby grip, especially if you've got a longer tipper, and if you're using a brush or rod tipper like this. So you can really but then you're not holding it in a fist. You're mostly gripping it between here and using the other fingers as a stop and support. So they're guiding but not gripping. Or the same thing with my pencil style grip. This middle finger is guiding but not gripping. Another thing to talk about is, fine-tuning that scrapey noise you get sometime. And that comes to grip again. I talked earlier about how one of the things you want to do is instead of striking directly at the surface, strike through. So you're hitting here on the downstroke and here on the upstroke, never actually in the center of your swing. But another thing to think about is the angle that you're hitting at, and that's where that guidance finger comes in. If you're hitting too shallow an angle or too steep of an angle, you're going to get some scrapey noise. So you want to be close to 45-degree angle to the head. And if you find your playing is very scrapey, look at what you're doing, look at the angle, look in a mirror if you have to, and see how you're hitting the drum. And work on, if you're too shallow, use this finger or these fingers to lift it. Or if you're too steep, drop it down a little bit. And start with about a 45-degree angle to the head and fine-tune it from there until you're comfortable. And then when you do your triplet, like so. So there's a couple tips. And as far as tipper styles go, and we talked about, I tend to gravitate towards kind of straight tippers more than bulbous these days, but I started on the bulbous. It can be easier to avoid the scrapies with a rounded end. But once you get the hang of it, you can just take a straight stick and this is just a straight stick of wood with a rubber band. I talked before about using an inexpensive bamboo skewer type tipper and a clipboard or notebook for practice, and this is what that would look like. This is I think you can get this on Amazon for about $10. It's bamboo skewers. It's a little bit rough, so I'd be careful using it on your actual drum without sanding down the end a little bit. A good metric is just kind of feel the end. If it feels like it's going to scrape your fingertips, it's going to scrape your drum skin, but it's fine on a piece of wood. This is just a plain old clipboard. Hold it straight up. So $10 for this, I think $1.99 for this, and there's your $12 practice pad setup, and you'll hear the difference compared to your drum.